"Mom, relax. It's just a guitar." Those were the words that cracked something deep inside me. My son, Tyler, stood in the middle of my living room, arms folded across his chest like a sulky teenager, even though he was 33 years old with a mortgage and 2 kids of his own. His voice was flat, casual, as if he hadn't just bulldozed the last fragile bridge between me and the man I loved. I had been washing dishes when he said it. My hands were still dripping with soap, a dish towel slung over my shoulder when I turned and saw the empty space in the corner. The stand where the guitar had rested for decades. Gone. My heart lurched. For a moment, I thought I was losing my mind, that I had misplaced an entire guitar like one might misplace car keys. But then Tyler's words hit me again, like a second blow. I sold it. I gripped the edge of the counter so hard my knuckles whitened. My husband's guitar, the old mahogany acoustic he had played on our front porch during warm summer nights, the one he strummed softly when our son was a baby, rocking him to sleep, that guitar was the last piece of our youth we still had, and Tyler had sold it like it was an unwanted piece of furniture. "You what?" My voice cracked, sounding foreign even to me. He rolled his eyes, that teenage tick he never outgrew. "Mom, come on. You never even played it. It was just collecting dust. I got a good price for it, too. We needed the money more than you needed another memory cluttering up this house, a good price." I wanted to scream at him that there was no price for what that guitar meant, that the grooves in its fretboard carried the ghost of his father's fingertips, calloused from years of work and music, that the faded pickguard still bore scratches from songs played at family cookouts, nights when our tiny home brimmed with laughter and love. But Tyler wasn't looking at me. He was already checking his phone, thumb scrolling detached. My throat tightened. "That guitar wasn't just wood and strings," I whispered. "It was the sound of your father's voice, the way he looked at me when he played our song, the lullabies he sang to you when you were too fussy to sleep. Do you even remember?" "Mom." He sighed, impatient. "Dad's been gone for years. You can't keep holding on to every little thing. It's not healthy, not healthy." The words stung like acid. Grief apparently had an expiration date, and my son had decided mine had passed. I stared at him, the man I had raised, and wondered where the boy I once knew had gone. The boy who had sat cross-legged at his father's feet, begging for one more song. The boy who used to press his tiny hands against the guitar body just to feel the vibration of the strings. Now, that same boy looked at me like I was foolish, like sentiment was weakness. I wanted to beg him to bring it back, to undo what he'd done. But the set of his jaw told me the guitar was gone, and nothing I said would change that. "Which store?" My voice was steadier now, cold in a way that surprised even me. He looked up, startled. "Why?" "Because I'm going to get it back." Tyler laughed under his breath, dismissive. "Mom, seriously, don't make a scene. Some things just belong in the past. Let it go, but I couldn't. I wouldn't. That guitar was the last surviving piece of the life I built with his father, my partner, my love. To Tyler, it was clutter. To me, it was sacred." After he left, slamming the door behind him like a teenager grounded for the weekend, I stood in the silence of my home. My chest ached, but beneath the grief and betrayal, something else flickered. Resolve. He thought I was too fragile, too sentimental, too bound to the past. What he didn't know was that I had lived long enough to understand the difference between giving up and fighting for what mattered. That guitar mattered. And as I dried my trembling hands on the dish towel and stared at the empty corner of my living room, I swore to myself I would find it, whatever it took. The next morning, I woke up with a knot in my stomach and a clarity I hadn't felt in years. Sleep had been impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my husband sitting on the porch with that guitar balanced on his knee, fingers moving effortlessly across the strings, his voice soft and warm under the summer stars. Losing him had hollowed me out once already. Losing that guitar felt like burying him all over again. I poured myself a cup of coffee, let it go cold on the counter, and drove across town with nothing but determination holding me together. The pawn shop Tyler had mentioned wasn't far, just off Main Street, wedged between a boarded-up diner and a liquor store that never seemed to close. Its neon sign flickered in the gray morning light. Easy Cash Pawn. The bell above the door jangled as I stepped inside. The smell hit me first, stale cigarette smoke and dust, with an undertone of desperation. The place was cluttered with glass cases full of mismatched jewelry, electronics stacked on sagging shelves, guitars hanging on the wall like trophies stripped from someone else's memories. Behind the counter, a man in his 40s looked up from a ledger. His arms were covered in faded tattoos, and his eyes had that weary, seen-it-all look. He gave me a curt nod. "Morning. Can I help you?" I swallowed hard. "My son sold you an old guitar yesterday. Mahogany, worn fretboard, initials carved inside the strap button. It was my husband's." His expression softened, but only slightly. "You Dorothy?" The sound of my name startled me. "Yes." He sighed, set the ledger aside. "Yeah, your boy was in here. Said you were having a hard time letting go of the past. Told me not to be surprised if you showed up." My cheeks burned. That my son had not only sold my husband's guitar, but warned a stranger about me, as if I were some hysterical woman about to cause a scene, was almost too much to bear. I pressed my palms against the counter, willing myself not to cry. "I'll buy it back," I said firmly. "Whatever you paid, I'll double it." The man shifted uncomfortably, running a hand over his stubble. I wish it was that simple. Thing is, it's already gone. The words sank like stones in my chest. Already gone. Sold to another stranger who'd never know the love songs soaked into its wood. My knees felt weak, and for a moment I thought I might actually collapse right there on the dingy pawn shop floor. "But," he added quickly, as if trying to soften the blow, "before it left, I found something." Something tucked inside. I blinked, unsure I'd heard him right. Inside? Yeah, when I was cleaning it up for display, I noticed the sound hole felt off, like there was something stuck. I pulled it out. He reached beneath the counter, rummaged for a moment, and came back with a small, creased manila envelope. "Figured it might mean something to you." Didn't look like trash. With trembling hands, I took it. The paper was yellowed, edges worn like it had been hidden for decades. I held my breath as I slid out the folded contents. It was a note, written in my husband's handwriting. My knees buckled at the sight of it, that familiar looping script I hadn't seen since the sympathy cards came after his funeral. My vision blurred as I traced the letters with my fingertip. The note wasn't long, but every word hit me like a drumbeat. My name. A date, July 12th, 1979, a line that read, "The day I knew the music would always belong to us," and then a series of letters and numbers scrawled carefully beneath, MH-4527-CL/DS. My chest tightened. What was this? A code? A lockbox number? My husband had never kept secrets from me, or so I thought. Yet here was proof that even after decades of marriage, there were corners of his soul I'd never been allowed to see. The man behind the counter shifted, uneasy. I don't know what it means. But when I told the guy who bought the guitar that I'd found something, he got real interested. Asked a few too many questions, if you know what I mean. A shiver rippled through me. Someone else was out there, holding the guitar, knowing it carried more than memories. I tucked the envelope into my purse, close to my chest like it was sacred. "Do you know who bought it?" He shook his head. "Cash sale. No paperwork. Just said he was into vintage guitars. But trust me, lady, he knew what he was looking for." The world seemed to tilt. All I had wanted was my husband's guitar back. Instead, I walked out clutching a mystery I didn't know how to solve. Outside, the morning sun had burned away the gray, but inside me, clouds gathered. My husband had left me something hidden inside a guitar he knew I'd keep forever. And now a stranger held it, maybe chasing the same secret. For the first time, since Tyler admitted what he'd done, my grief shifted into something else. Not just sorrow, not just betrayal, but determination. I wasn't going to lose whatever my husband had wanted me to find. When I got home from the pawn shop, I didn't even take off my coat. I went straight to the old cedar chest at the foot of my bed, the one that had sat there for as long as I could remember. Inside it were scraps of my life with him. Photographs, letters, ticket stubs, pressed flowers from dances long gone. All of it smelled faintly of cedar and dust, but more than that, it smelled like him. I pulled out a stack of faded Polaroids and sat on the floor, my back pressed against the chest. In one photo, he was 21 again, sitting on the hood of his beat-up Ford with that guitar in his lap, grinning like the world had finally bent in his favor. His hair was longer then, wilder, and his jeans had holes he'd earned, not bought. I remembered the way he used to play for me under the stars behind my parents' house, his thumb brushing the strings, his voice soft enough that it felt like a secret he only ever told me. That guitar had been the soundtrack of my life. When we couldn't afford cable, he played to fill the silence. When we rocked our newborn, Tyler, in the middle of the night, he'd pluck lullabies until the baby's cries gave way to hiccupy breaths. When arguments got heated, he'd soften them with a song, apologizing in chords before the words could come. And when he was sick, when the hospital visits became too frequent, he still found the strength to play, if only for a few minutes at a time, until his hands shook too much to keep a rhythm. And now Tyler had called it just a guitar. My eyes stung as I set the photo aside and unfolded the note again. That looping handwriting, steady, deliberate, familiar as my own heartbeat, pulled me back to another summer, July 12th, 1979, the note's date. My pulse quickened as I remembered. That night had been one of those sticky Midwest evenings when the air felt heavy with heat and fireflies danced along the yard. We had gone to a little bar downtown, the kind with cheap beer and a stage barely big enough for a microphone stand. He'd signed up for the open mic on a whim, bringing me along with nothing but his guitar and a nervous grin. I could still see him under those yellowed lights, strumming the first chords, his voice trembling for a verse before finding its strength. And then he looked right at me, only at me, as he sang a song he'd written that morning. A love song, simple and raw, about the way he felt when I walked into a room. That was the night I knew. The night the whole world narrowed down to his voice and that guitar. He told me afterward, his shirt damp with sweat, that he'd known too. "The music belongs to us now," he'd said, his hand warm on mine. And now, decades later, the note confirmed it. He'd written that exact phrase. The day I knew the music would always belong to us, only he'd added the strange code beneath, MH4527CL/DS. I stared at the letters until they blurred. MH could be anything. A city, a set of initials, maybe even music hall. CL/DS. Was that his name and mine? Carl and Dorothy Sullivan. My heart thudded as I considered it. Why would he hide this? Why not just tell me? I set the note down and pressed my palms against my eyes. My husband had been many things: a dreamer, a provider, a man who fixed his own cars and taught our boy how to fish, but a secret keeper. That part of him I'd never known. The betrayal and grief tangled in me like vines. Yet, mixed in, there was something else, a spark of curiosity, an invitation. He had left this note for me to find, hidden inside the guitar. It wasn't meant for Tyler. It wasn't meant for anyone else. It was mine. Outside, the evening sun slanted through the blinds, striping the room in gold. I traced the edges of the note again, whispering his words to myself. The music belongs to us. The guitar might be gone, but the message wasn't. He was still talking to me, across years and silence, leaving me a puzzle wrapped in love and mystery. For the first time in months, I felt something stir in me that wasn't sorrow. It was determination, maybe even hope. Whatever he had left hidden in that guitar, I was going to find it. And God help anyone who tried to stand in my way. I sat at my kitchen table that night with the notes spread out in front of me, my reading glasses perched on the end of my nose, a legal pad beside me like I was back in school again. The house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator, but inside me, questions buzzed louder than cicadas in July. MH4527CL/DS. It looked like nonsense at first glance, just letters and numbers. But my husband was not careless. He was deliberate. Every song he wrote, every chord progression he played, there was always intention, always meaning tucked between the notes. If he had left me this, it wasn't random. I wrote it out a dozen times in block letters, circling each piece like I could force it to confess. MH4527 CLDSMH, Music Hall, Madison Heights? My mind flickered back to the night of the open mic in 1979. The little bar had been called the Copper Lantern, but everyone in town nicknamed it the Music Hall because once a month it hosted acts bigger than its tiny stage could hold. My heart skipped. Could MH stand for that? Then 4527. At first, I thought it might be an account number, maybe even a safe combination. But something about it tugged at my memory. Numbers always meant something to him. Birthdays, anniversaries, addresses. He had a way of encoding our life into digits. Could 4,527 have been an address? A P.O. box? I pulled out the yellowing stack of old bills and papers I'd saved in the cedar chest. Buried in the mess of envelopes was a return address from our first apartment together. Apartment 27 at 45th Street, 4,527. My pulse quickened. He was weaving our life into this code, stringing together breadcrumbs like verses in a song. CL. My pen hovered as I wrote it again and again. The Copper Lantern. Of course, that bar where he played our song for the first time. The night the note itself referenced, and DS, my initials, Dorothy Sullivan. I leaned back in my chair, my chest tight. My husband had tucked a memory into the bones of that guitar, disguised as gibberish, waiting for me to uncover it years later. It was like he'd written our love story in shorthand. But why? The realization sent a shiver down my spine. This wasn't just a sentimental gesture. He hadn't scribbled a note for nostalgia's sake. He had hidden it, tucked it away inside the guitar's hollow body, sealed away where no one would ever stumble across it by accident, which meant it was important. I set down my pen and stared at the note until the lines blurred. If MH was the music hall, the Copper Lantern, and 4,527 was our old address, then what was he pointing me toward? A location? A deposit box? Something left behind? My stomach churned. I had always thought I knew every part of him. He wasn't a man of secrets. He'd tell me about the way his knees ached before a storm or how worried he was about paying the gas bill. He confessed his fears and his hopes like they were sacred hymns. And yet, here was proof that for decades he had carried something he hadn't shared. I pressed the note flat with my palms. "What were you hiding, love?" I whispered into the empty kitchen. The silence offered no answer, but my gut told me this code was a map, and the guitar, my son's careless, thoughtless sale, had been the key. For a moment, anger at Tyler boiled back up. He hadn't just sold a keepsake. He'd ripped away the very container holding my husband's secret. And yet, maybe in some twisted way, it was meant to happen. Maybe if Tyler hadn't forced my hand, I never would have discovered the note at all. I shoved back from the table and opened my laptop. If there was one thing my years working at the library had taught me, it was how to dig. Addresses, maps, records. I could find anything if I was patient enough. I typed in Copper Lantern, but the search results made my stomach drop. The bar had shut down years ago. The building had been condemned, standing abandoned like a skeleton on the edge of town. Still, the pieces tugged at me, insistent. MH4 of 27 CLDS. It wasn't random. He wanted me to find something there. I folded the note carefully and slipped it back into its envelope. My hands trembled as I tucked it into my purse. I didn't know exactly what I was walking into, but I knew one thing for certain. My husband had left me a trail, and I was going to follow it. Whatever he had hidden in that guitar, whatever message he had left in the code, it was mine to uncover. And if someone else, whoever bought that guitar, was after it too, then they had no idea what kind of woman they were up against. I should have kept the note to myself. Deep down, I knew that. But grief and confusion make fools out of us. And sometimes the loneliness presses so hard on your chest that you start grasping for anyone who will listen. That evening, Tyler called to check in, though his tone was more perfunctory than caring. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something in me, the mother still desperate for connection, picked up. "Mom," he said, his voice clipped, "I hope you didn't actually embarrass yourself at that pawn shop." Embarrass myself? That's what he thought this was about. I gripped the phone so tight my knuckles ached. "I went there, yes. And do you know what they found inside your father's guitar?" The line went quiet. For the first time since this ordeal began, I had his full attention. Inside it? Yes, a note. In your father's handwriting, there was a pause. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. Sharper, more alert. What kind of note? I hesitated. My instinct screamed at me to guard it, but some stubborn part of me wanted him to feel the weight of what he'd taken. A code, numbers and letters, and a message. Something about the night he knew the music belonged to us. For a moment, silence again, then too quickly. "Do you still have it?" Something cold slid through me. Just hours ago, Tyler had dismissed the guitar as junk, sentimental clutter. Now his voice carried a hunger I hadn't heard in years, not since he was a boy begging for something he shouldn't have. "I do," I said carefully. "Mom, listen. Maybe I should come over, help you figure it out." I almost laughed. Bitter, sharp. "You mean the way you helped by selling your father's guitar behind my back?" "Mom, that's not fair." "Fair?" My voice rose, surprising even me. "Your father worked overtime shifts so you could have braces. He sold his record collection to buy you a car when you turned 16. He put his dreams on hold to give you a better life. And you sold the one thing left of him for pocket money." He exhaled hard into the phone. "You're being dramatic. I told you we needed it. The kids needed—" "The kids didn't ask for this," I snapped. "You made that choice. Don't you dare pin it on them." For a long beat, neither of us spoke. Finally, his tone shifted again, low and measured. "Mom, just tell me what the code says. Maybe Dad left it for both of us." The implication cut me deeper than the sale of the guitar ever had. For both of us. No, my husband hadn't hidden something for the son who pawned away his memory. He had left it for me, his wife, his partner. The one who had walked beside him through 4 decades of bills, broken down cars, sickness, and laughter. "You wouldn't understand it," I lied. Another pause. This one stretched so long I wondered if he'd hung up. Then, "Fine. Keep your secrets. Just don't come crying to me when you get yourself in trouble chasing ghosts." The line went dead. I sat there at the kitchen table, phone buzzing in my hand from the abrupt disconnection. My chest felt hollow, my pulse too fast. I thought of the way his tone had shifted, the sudden sharpness when he asked what the note said. It wasn't grief driving his curiosity. It was something else. Greed, maybe, or fear. I reached into my purse and pulled out the envelope again, smoothing the paper flat. My initials, our old address. The bar where he first sang to me. My husband had left this for me, and me alone. Tyler couldn't be trusted with it. Maybe he never could. For years I had made excuses for him. Blamed the economy when he lost jobs. Blamed stress when he snapped at me. blamed exhaustion when he grew distant, distracted, cold. But that moment on the phone stripped away every excuse I had ever made. My son no longer saw me as his mother. He saw me as an obstacle. The note wasn't just a clue now, it was a responsibility, a test of whether I still had enough strength left in me to honor the man I loved. And God help me, I wasn't about to fail him. I folded the paper back into its envelope, tucked it into my desk drawer, and turned the key in the lock. For the first time since I'd lost my husband, I felt the stirrings of something fierce and defiant in my chest. I would follow the code, alone. And whatever Tyler was scheming, I would be ready. The house was quiet that night. Too quiet, like the silence itself was watching me. After the call with Tyler, I couldn't sit still. My body was jittery, my mind restless. Every corner of this home held echoes of him. My husband's laughter, his footsteps, the faint hum of a tune he'd play when he thought no one was listening. I needed answers, and I knew where to start. I pulled down the cardboard boxes from the hall closet, the ones labeled in my own handwriting. Records, photos, old papers. Dust puffed into the air, making me cough. I dragged them to the dining room table and began digging. At first, it was just clutter. Old utility bills, medical paperwork, grocery receipts he had insisted on filing away. He was meticulous like that, always wanting proof, always saving. But beneath the stacks of everyday life, I found treasures. Handwritten lyrics on napkins, concert tickets from bands we couldn't afford but went to see anyway, even a postcard from Nashville he'd sent me while on a work trip, with nothing written on it except, "Someday." I set it aside, my fingers lingering. That one word had carried us through our youth, through the lean years when rent and groceries left nothing for dreams. Someday, he'd said, someday we'd have more. I opened another box and pulled out his journals, black leather-bound notebooks, their pages filled with the scrawl only I could read. He'd written everything down, set lists, grocery lists, thoughts that came to him in the middle of the night. I flipped through them, my eyes scanning for anything that matched the code, MH4527, CLDS. Halfway through the second notebook, I froze. There it was. The Copper Lantern, July 12, 1979, scribbled on the margin beside a list of chords. Underneath, his words, "The night everything changed." The music became ours. My breath caught. He had written about that night, the very night the note referenced. But there was more. In the same entry, a rough sketch of the bar's stage, and written at the bottom, 4527, don't forget. Don't forget. I flipped faster, pages fluttering. In later entries, the number appeared again and again, scribbled in margins, sometimes circled, sometimes underlined. Always alone. No explanation. Just 4,527. It wasn't random. It couldn't be. I thought of the old address again, 45th Street, apartment 27. But why keep writing it years after we'd moved? Why hide it inside his guitar? I set the journal down and rubbed my temples. My husband had been careful, deliberate. He had left this trail for me to follow, but he'd also cloaked it in secrecy. That secrecy gnawed at me. Why hadn't he trusted me with it when he was alive? The question made my chest ache. We'd promised each other no secrets, not after that first year of marriage when we learned the hard way how silence corrodes. He had kept this, though. Not out of malice. I refused to believe that, but out of necessity. I dug deeper into the boxes. Receipts, photographs, more journals. And then, tucked between old sheet music, I found something else. A small key taped to a piece of cardboard. No label, no explanation. Just a key, worn smooth by time. My heart pounded. The code. The journals? The key. They were pieces of a puzzle I hadn't even known existed. My husband, my steady, open, honest husband, had lived with a hidden verse in his life's song. I sat back, overwhelmed, the key clutched in my palm. Tyler's face flashed in my mind, his sudden sharp interest when I'd mentioned the note, his insistence on helping me figure it out. He wanted what his father had left behind, but he didn't understand what it really meant. This wasn't just about money or possessions. This was about love, memory, legacy. I placed the journals back in the box, locked the key in the desk drawer beside the note, and exhaled. The weight of responsibility pressed heavy on me, but under it, something else stirred. Resolve. I didn't know exactly what my husband wanted me to find, but I knew this much. He had trusted me to be the one to discover it. Not Tyler. Not anyone else. Me. And I wasn't about to let him down. The following afternoon, just as I was stacking the journals back into their box, the phone rang. For a moment, I considered letting it go. These days, the calls were either telemarketers or Tyler, but something told me to pick up. "Mrs. Sullivan?" a man's voice asked. "Yes," I said cautiously. "This is Ray, from Easy Cash Pawn. We met yesterday about the guitar." My pulse quickened. "Yes, did you get it back?" "No, ma'am," he said, his tone apologetic. "I told you the guitar's already sold. But I thought you should know, the buyer came back today." I gripped the receiver tighter. "Came back? For what?" "He asked about the envelope," Ray said. "The one I gave you. He wanted to know if I'd opened it, what was inside. Seemed real curious, more curious than a man buying a beat-up guitar should have been. I didn't tell him anything. Figured it wasn't my business, but it didn't sit right with me. Thought you ought to be aware a chill ran down my spine. Someone else knew there was more to that guitar than met the eye." "Did he leave a name?" I asked. "Paid in cash, no ID, mid-50s maybe, clean cut, dressed like a businessman. Carried himself too polished for a guy browsing pawn shops, if you know what I mean." I swallowed hard. "What did he say exactly?" Ray hesitated, then lowered his voice as though someone might overhear. When I mentioned I'd found something tucked inside, his whole demeanor changed. Leaned in real close, asked if I'd read it. When I said no, he wanted to know who I gave it to. I didn't answer, but he looked satisfied, like he'd already guessed. The envelope was in my locked desk drawer. My husband's handwriting burned in my mind. MH4527CL/DS. The man knew something, maybe even more than I did. "Did he say if he'd be back?" I asked. "He didn't have to," Ray said. "The way he looked, I'd bet he's not done with that guitar. Or with you." When I hung up, my hands were trembling. I locked the doors, checked the windows twice. The quiet of the house, once comforting, now felt suffocating, as though every shadow held a pair of watching eyes. I paced the kitchen, the note's code echoing in my head. I thought about the journals, the key I'd found, the way Tyler's voice had sharpened the second I mentioned the note. My own son's greed was one thing, but this was different. This was a stranger. Someone deliberate who seemed to know the guitar was hiding something all along. I went to the drawer, pulled out the envelope, and unfolded the paper again. My husband's handwriting was steady, unshaken, as though he had known this moment would come. July 12th, 1979. The day I knew the music would always belong to us, and beneath it, the code. I whispered it aloud like a prayer. HC Hasingecht Kiel Ds. It wasn't just a memory, it was instructions, a breadcrumb trail, and now someone else wanted to follow it too. I sat down heavily at the kitchen table. My heart pounded not just with fear, but with a dawning realization. My husband hadn't left this hidden in the guitar by accident. He had left it there because he knew someday I would need it, and that others might try to take it. The thought was terrifying, yes, but buried in it was also a strange comfort. He had trusted me to find it. He had believed I would be strong enough to carry whatever burden came with it. I folded the note carefully, tucked it back into the envelope, and slipped it into my purse this time. The desk drawer no longer felt safe enough. If this mysterious buyer was determined, if Tyler kept sniffing around, I couldn't afford to be careless. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the house set me on edge. Every passing car's headlights made me sit up straighter in bed. I kept the envelope under my pillow like a child hiding treasure, my fingers brushing it in the dark just to reassure myself it was still there. I had spent months drifting in grief, letting the world move around me while I stood still. But now the pieces were shifting, pulling me into motion whether I was ready or not. My husband had left me a secret. A stranger was after it, and my own son couldn't be trusted. I stared at the ceiling until dawn, whispering to myself, "Dorothy, you are stronger than they think, stronger than even you believe." Whatever was waiting for me at the end of this trail, I would face it head on. Because the music didn't just belong to us. It belonged to me now. I couldn't shake the stranger's shadow from my mind. All day, I kept glancing toward the front window, half expecting a car to idle outside, headlights burning through the glass. But the street stayed quiet, too quiet. By evening, I had had enough of pacing the house like a caged animal. Fear wouldn't solve anything. Answers would. So I brewed a pot of strong coffee, cleared the kitchen table, and spread out everything I had: the journals, the postcard, the key, and the note with that maddening string of letters and numbers. MH4527 CL/DS. I traced the letters with my finger, whispering them aloud like an incantation. My husband had left me this breadcrumb trail for a reason. If he were here, he'd be chuckling softly, nudging me toward the solution. "Come on, Dot," he'd say. "You've always been the clever one." MH. My first guess had been music hall, the copper lantern. But what if it meant something else? My husband loved double meanings. MH could also be Millennium Hall, the old community center where we used to dance on Saturday nights, or maybe Memorial Hospital, where Tyler was born. I scribbled down every possibility, filling the page with frantic notes. 4,527. The number was the anchor. It had haunted me since I first saw it, like a tune you can't get out of your head. Our old address, apartment 27 on 45th Street, fit perfectly. But he'd written it down long after we moved out. Why? I flipped through his journals again, searching, and then I saw it. In one entry, buried between a grocery list and half a verse of a love song, he had written, "Don't forget 4527, locker code." My breath hitched. Locker code. I thought of bus stations, train depots, gyms, places with rental lockers, places where a man could hide something away for decades, unbothered. I grabbed my phone and searched. Copper lantern Chicago storage lockers. My fingers trembled as I typed. The bar had closed down, but the building hadn't been demolished. It had been converted years ago into a self-storage facility. My heart thundered. Storage. Lockers. I leaned back, staring at the screen. Could it really be that simple? CL, the copper lantern, 4,527, a locker number. MH, maybe shorthand he used for music hall, his nickname for the bar. DS, my initials. The proof that whatever was in that locker was meant for me. My hands shook as I pulled the tiny key out of my desk drawer. Could this be it? A key to a storage locker he had rented all those years ago? I sat there for a long moment, the weight of it pressing down on me. If I was right, then my husband had hidden something important, something valuable enough to guard with codes and keys, something he hadn't wanted me or anyone to stumble across casually. But why? What could possibly be locked away all this time? I thought back to the stranger at the pawn shop, the way Ray described his sharp interest in the envelope. This wasn't about music or sentimentality. He was chasing the same secret my husband had buried. And if he knew about the locker, he could already be one step ahead of me. I pressed the key into my palm until it left an imprint. Number. This was mine to find. My husband had trusted me, not him. I stayed up past midnight, poring over every scrap of paper, every margin note in the journals. The more I read, the more certain I became. The copper lantern wasn't just where our story began. It was where he had chosen to hide something for me. Maybe because he knew I'd always go back to that night. Maybe because he knew music was the thread that tied everything together. At 2 in the morning, exhausted but resolute, I closed the journal and set the note beside it. My decision was made. Tomorrow, I was going to the old copper lantern building. I would find locker 4527, and I would use this key. I brushed my fingers across his handwriting one more time. The day I knew the music would always belong to us. Tomorrow, I whispered into the empty house, I'll find what you left for me. The silence didn't answer, but in that moment I could almost hear him strumming a familiar chord, urging me forward. The next morning I drove across town with the key clenched so tightly in my fist my knuckles throbbed. The old copper lantern building stood at the edge of a forgotten block, its once bright neon sign now a rusted skeleton jutting against the cloudy sky. I hadn't set foot there in decades. The last time had been with him, his guitar slung over his shoulder, my heart full of music and love. Now it was a storage facility, the kind where people tucked away pieces of themselves they weren't ready to throw out, but couldn't keep at home either. The front office smelled faintly of stale coffee and cleaning supplies. A clerk in a faded polo shirt barely glanced up from his crossword when I walked in. "Locker access?" he mumbled. "Yes," I said, my voice unsteady. 4527. He tapped at a computer, scribbled something on a clipboard, then waved me through the steel door with hardly a glance. My heart raced as I stepped into the dim hallway lined with identical metal doors, each padlocked, each hiding someone's secrets. I walked slowly, counting down. 4,519, 4,523. My breath caught when I reached 4,527. The numbers stenciled on the door were faded, but they were there, waiting for me. My hands trembled as I slid the little key into the lock. For a terrifying moment, it didn't budge, and I thought I had been wrong, that the code was a dead end. But then I turned it, and the lock clicked open with a sound so sharp it seemed to echo down the hall. I lifted the door. The smell hit me first, old wood, paper, and time. Inside was a simple trunk, the kind you'd expect to see in a soldier's barracks. Dented, scratched, heavy with the weight of years. My chest tightened as I knelt and flipped the latch. Inside, I found layers of carefully folded fabric, old flannel shirts of his, worn soft at the elbows. My breath hitched as I pressed one to my face, inhaling the faint trace of him still lingering after all these years. Beneath the shirts were stacks of notebooks, like the journals I had at home, but older, their covers frayed, pages yellowed. I pulled one out and flipped it open. Music notation filled the pages, songs I'd never seen before, songs he'd never played for me. Lyrics written in his hand, some finished, some half-formed. At the bottom of one page, a line was underlined twice. "For Dorothy, when she's ready." Tears blurred my vision. He'd been writing for me all along, saving pieces of himself I'd never known existed. But there was more. At the bottom of the trunk sat a smaller box, locked with another keyhole. My pulse hammered as I reached into my purse, the little key that had come taped to the cardboard in his journals. My fingers shook as I slid it in. This lock turned more easily, almost like it had been waiting for me. Inside the box lay a bundle of envelopes tied with twine. Each one bore my name. I picked the top envelope and opened it with trembling hands. His handwriting stared back at me. "Dot, if you found this, then you found the music I couldn't bring myself to play out loud." The letter was long, pages of him pouring his heart onto paper. He wrote about the dreams he'd never confessed, the fear that he wasn't good enough to make it as a musician, the way he had written songs for me in secret, storing them here where no one could laugh or dismiss them. He wrote about wanting me to discover them when I was strong enough, when grief wasn't weighing me down, when I could see them as the gift they were meant to be. By the time I finished the first letter, tears were sliding down my cheeks. This wasn't money or valuables he had hidden away. It was him, his music, his voice captured in ink and melody, preserved for me like a time capsule. but tucked beneath the letters was something else, a leather pouch, inside a cassette tape. On it, his neat handwriting again. Dorothy's song. 1979. My heart stuttered. That was the night at the Copper Lantern, the night he'd sung to me, the song that changed everything. I sat back on the cold cement floor, clutching the tape, overwhelmed. This was his legacy, not wealth, not possessions, his music, his heart, and he'd hidden it where only I would ever find it. But as I wiped my tears, the weight of reality pressed in. The stranger from the pawn shop, Tyler's sudden interest, neither of them would care about songs or letters. They would think there was money, valuables, something they could take. I tucked the envelopes back into the box, locked it tight, and carried it out with me. My husband had trusted me to protect this, to protect him, and I would. Even if it meant fighting my own son, even if it meant standing against strangers who thought they could strip away what little I had left. Because the music wasn't theirs. It was ours. I should have known Tyler wouldn't leave it alone. A mother always hopes for the best in her child, but sometimes the truth barges in, uninvited and undeniable. It was 2 nights after I brought the trunk home from the storage unit. I'd hidden it in my bedroom closet under an old quilt, as though the worn fabric could guard the weight of what it carried. I had barely slept since then. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard his voice on that cassette tape, the younger, braver man who had sung to me at the Copper Lantern, his words trembling, but true. I hadn't even finished listening to it before I wept too hard to continue. That night, just as I was drying dishes, the doorbell rang. Through the glass, I saw Tyler standing on the porch. He wasn't alone. His wife, Jenna, hovered behind him, arms crossed, her lips pulled into the thin smile she used whenever she thought she had the upper hand. I opened the door, a crack. "What do you want, Tyler?" He looked me up and down, his eyes sharp. "We need to talk." "About what?" I asked, though my gut already knew. Jenna pushed past him, stepping into my living room without invitation. "Let's not play games, Dorothy," she said, her voice dripping with sugar. "Tyler told me you found something." In the guitar, my chest tightened. "That's none of your business." "Mom," Tyler said, his voice adopting that condescending calm he always used when he thought I was being unreasonable. "We're family. There shouldn't be secrets between us." I almost laughed. Secrets? That was rich, coming from the son who had sold his father's guitar behind my back, who had spoken to me as though grief had a time limit. I folded my arms. "The only secret here is why you care all of a sudden. Yesterday it was just an old guitar. Today you're pounding on my door. Why the sudden interest, Tyler?" He shifted, his jaw tightening. "Because maybe Dad left something important. Something we all should know about." Jenna stepped closer, her perfume thick, cloying. "We're just worried about you, Dorothy. You've been alone too long. Sometimes widows, well, they imagine things. It would be safer if Tyler helped you manage whatever you found. He has the kids to think about. He could make sure it's all handled properly." There it was. Not even a shred of shame in her voice, just the bare-faced greed, dressed up in concern. I took a slow breath. My husband's letters, his music, his secrets, they weren't for them. They were for me, and I wasn't about to hand them over. "I appreciate your concern," I said evenly, "but there's nothing here for you to manage." Tyler's eyes narrowed. "Mom, don't do this. If there's money, if there's property, we should be in the loop. Dad wouldn't want you carrying that burden alone." I stared at him, my own son, and for a fleeting moment, I saw the boy he used to be, the one who clapped his hands when his father strummed his first lullaby, the one who pressed his ear against the guitar body to feel the vibration. But that boy was gone. In his place stood a man with debts in his eyes and entitlement in his voice. "Your father left me a gift," I said, my voice hardening. "Not you. Not Jenna. Me. And it's not money." It's not something you can pawn or spend. It's his heart, his music, his words, and I won't let you cheapen them." Jenna scoffed, rolling her eyes. "So you expect us to believe he hid love letters and lullabies inside a guitar?" "That's ridiculous." I stepped closer, using every inch of my height to look down at her. "Ridiculous or not, it's mine. And if either of you try to take it from me, you'll regret it." Tyler's face darkened. "Mom, don't threaten us." "I'm not threatening," I said, my voice calm, steady. "I'm promising." For a long moment, the air between us crackled, heavy with things none of us wanted to say out loud. Finally, Jenna tugged at Tyler's arm. "Let's go," she muttered. "She's not worth it." But Tyler didn't move. He just stared at me, his jaw tight, his eyes conflicted. For the briefest second, I thought I saw shame flicker there, the ghost of the boy he used to be. Then it was gone. He turned on his heel, slamming the door behind him. I stood in the silence, my heart racing, my hands shaking. They knew now. They wouldn't stop. I went to the closet, pulled out the trunk, and rested my hand on its dented lid. "Don't worry," I whispered. "I'll protect you. I'll protect what you left me because for the first time since my husband died, I understood something. Grief had made me fragile. But this fight was making me strong again, and I was ready." The night after Tyler stormed out, I couldn't bring myself to sleep. The trunk sat at the foot of my bed, heavy with everything my husband had left behind. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined Tyler and Jenna creeping back in the dark, prying it open, tearing through letters they couldn't possibly understand. By morning, I knew I couldn't carry this weight alone. My husband had trusted me, yes, but he had also raised me to be practical. He used to say, "Love is heart, but protection is strategy." If he had gone to such lengths to hide his words in music, then it was up to me to protect them now. I called our old friend and neighbor, Frank Miller. He wasn't just a friend. He'd been a lawyer for 40 years, and though he was retired now, his mind was sharp as ever. When he answered the phone, his voice warm and steady, the tears almost spilled over. "Dorothy? I've been meaning to check in on you. How are you holding up?" "I need your help," I said, my voice cracking. "I found something. Something he left for me. And I think other people are after it." There was a pause. Then his voice grew firm. "Come by the office." I may not practice anymore, but I still know how to keep people safe. I carried the trunk with me, my knuckles white on the handle, as if letting it out of my sight for even a second would mean losing it forever. Frank's office hadn't changed much since he retired. Dusty shelves of legal books, the faint smell of coffee and wood polish. He cleared a space on his desk as I set the trunk down. When I unlocked it and pulled out the letters, Frank leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. "My God, Dorothy. This is extraordinary. They're his songs," I whispered. "His words. He hid them all these years." I don't know why Frank read the first page slowly, then looked up. "Because he trusted you to find them when the time was right. This isn't just art. It's testimony. Proof of his love. His life. People won't see that, though. They'll see opportunity. Value. If Tyler suspects there's something here, he'll push harder." I swallowed hard. He already has. "He and Jenna came by last night. They want to know what I found." "They won't stop." Frank leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "Then we make sure they can't take it. You'll need to establish legal ownership of every item in here. Photocopy the letters, document the trunk's contents, date them. If Tyler tries to challenge you, we'll have proof it all belongs to you, not the estate." I hadn't even thought that far ahead. My husband had been gone for years, but the law was tricky, and greed made people bold. Relief loosened something in my chest for the first time in days. Frank smiled gently. "You don't have to do this alone, Dorothy. He wanted you to be protected, and now you will be." I nodded, my throat too, tight for words. That night, back home, I sat with the cassette tape in my hands. I hadn't had the courage to play it fully yet, afraid of what it might stir up. But after meeting with Frank, I felt steadier, ready. I slid it into the old tape deck I kept in the closet and pressed play. Static crackled. Then his voice filled the room, clear, young, alive. "Dot," he said softly, almost whispering into the recorder. "This one's for you." And then the guitar strummed, the melody familiar, and yet not. A song I hadn't heard in decades, raw and unfinished, but filled with the same love he'd carried to his last breath. His voice wavered on the high notes, but every word was drenched in devotion. I pressed my hand to my mouth, tears spilling down my cheeks. He had saved this for me, knowing someday I would need it, knowing someday it would remind me that I wasn't alone, no matter how dark the road became. When the song ended, I sat in the silence, my heart pounding. Tyler thought this was about money. The stranger thought it was about valuables. They didn't understand. This wasn't a fortune to be stolen. This was a legacy to be guarded. And now I had allies, a plan, and most importantly, the strength I hadn't felt in years. I locked the trunk again, slid the key into my pocket, and whispered into the quiet, "I'll protect you. Both of you. Always." It didn't take long for Tyler to make his move. A week after I'd shown the trunk to Frank, I came home to find him sitting on my porch, his car parked crooked in the driveway. His shoulders sagged, his eyes hollow. But when he looked up, I recognized that same hunger I'd heard in his voice on the phone. "Mom," he said, standing as I approached, "we need to talk." I kept my keys in my hand like a shield. "About what?" He rubbed the back of his neck, avoiding my gaze. "I know you've got something. Something Dad left behind, and I deserve to know." The words hit me like cold water. Deserve. "You deserve?" My voice came out sharper than I intended. "You sold his guitar, Tyler. You called it junk. You told me to let go. And now that you think there's something worth money, you deserve it?" His jaw tightened. "I made a mistake, okay? But Dad wouldn't want you hoarding things from the rest of the family." The family. He meant himself. Jenna. Their debts I'd heard whispers about. I took a slow breath, steadying myself. "Your father left me words, Tyler. Music, love letters, that's all. Nothing you can cash in at a bank, nothing that will fix your problems." His face darkened, the denial written all over it. "You're lying." He had to have left more. A man doesn't hide something like that unless it's valuable. "Valuable?" I whispered. "You mean money?" His silence was answer enough. For a long moment, we stood there, the gulf between us wider than it had ever been. Finally, I said, "You've made your choices, Tyler, and I've made mine. This isn't for you. It was never meant for you." He opened his mouth, but I held up a hand. "Don't come back here looking for what isn't yours." I've spoken to Frank Miller. Everything's documented, protected. If you try anything, it won't end well for you. His eyes flashed at the name. "You brought a lawyer into this?" "I brought protection into this," I said firmly, "because your father knew there would come a day when someone would try to take what wasn't theirs, and he trusted me to be strong enough to stop them." For the first time, Tyler looked small, not the towering man I'd raised, but the frightened boy he used to be, caught with his hand in the cookie jar. He muttered something I couldn't hear, then turned and walked to his car. I watched him drive away, my heart aching, but also lighter. Some bridges can't be rebuilt. Some ties are too frayed to mend. That night, I sat with the trunk again. I opened another letter, his handwriting neat and deliberate. "Dot, if you're reading this, it means I didn't get the chance to tell you everything. Don't let anyone make you doubt yourself. You are stronger than you think, stronger than I ever was. If the music belongs to us, then it belongs to you now. Play it, protect it, live it." I pressed the paper to my chest, tears sliding down my face. He had known. Somehow, he had known I would need these words, not just for comfort, but for courage. The stranger from the pawn shop never came back. Maybe he realized whatever he was chasing wasn't worth the trouble, or maybe he was still out there waiting. It didn't matter. The letters, the music, the tape, they were safe now. And so was I. Weeks passed. The house felt different. Not as hollow, not as heavy. I found myself humming again while I washed dishes. Some days, I even picked up my husband's old sheet music and plucked out chords on the cheap guitar I'd bought to fill the empty corner. I wasn't good, but that wasn't the point. The point was that the music was alive again. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the neighborhood, I sat on the porch with that guitar in my lap. My fingers fumbled, my voice cracked, but I sang anyway. A few neighbors paused on their walks, smiling politely, probably thinking I'd lost my mind, but I didn't care, because in that moment, I felt him there, beside me, steadying my hands, whispering encouragement the way he used to. Grief had taken so much from me, but the music had given something back, strength, hope, a reminder that love doesn't die. It just changes shape, waiting for us to find it again. As the last note faded into the night, I whispered, "I found it, love. I found what you left me." And for the first time in years, the silence that followed felt full, not empty. Months have passed now since I unlocked that storage locker and carried home the trunk that changed everything. The seasons have shifted. Summer's heat has softened into autumn's crisp air, and the trees outside my window are painted gold and crimson. And still, every evening, I sit with his letters, his songs, and that one cassette tape that has become my lifeline. The first time I played it, I couldn't get through the whole song without sobbing. The second time, I managed a verse. By the third, I was humming along. Now, I let it play often, sometimes on repeat, his voice filling the rooms that once echoed only with silence. It doesn't erase the grief, but it reminds me that love doesn't vanish just because a body is gone. It lingers, stubborn and faithful, like music caught in the rafters. Tyler hasn't been back. There are whispers, of course. Jenna running her mouth about how I've hidden some great inheritance, neighbors politely asking if I'm all right. But thanks to Frank, every word and every page is secured. If they ever tried to come after me again, they'd find themselves standing in a courtroom, not in my living room. I carry that knowledge like armor. And yet, sometimes, when I catch a glimpse of Tyler's children riding their bikes past my house, my heart aches. They wave shyly, still unsure where the lines in the family have been drawn. I wave back every time. They are not their father. They are still pieces of him. My boy, once so small he used to fall asleep listening to that guitar hum against his cheek. I hold on to hope that someday maybe he'll remember that version of himself and we'll find our way back. Until then, I have what matters most. I've begun organizing his songs. Some are incomplete, half melodies scribbled in the margins of grocery lists. Others are finished works, full of longing and laughter. I take them to the library on Saturdays, where a group of retirees meets in a drafty room to share music. I never thought I'd be brave enough to play in front of strangers, but when I bring his songs, the room goes still. They recognize the truth in them, the honesty, the love. One man even told me, with tears in his eyes, that it reminded him of his own late wife. In that moment, I felt my husband smiling down, proud. The guitar itself, the one Tyler sold, is still gone. Maybe it's hanging in some collector's room, polished and silent. Maybe it's gathering dust in another corner, waiting. But I've come to realize the guitar was never the true treasure. What mattered was what it carried inside, what it pointed me toward. And in a way, I think that's what my husband wanted, to remind me that love isn't in the object. It's in the meaning we attach, in the stories, in the songs. I've started keeping a journal of my own. Each entry, I write something I want my children and grandchildren to know. Stories, recipes, little truths I don't want lost when I'm gone. I tape his lyrics alongside my words, weaving our voices together. Because someday, when I'm not here, I want them to find these pages and hear us both. Last night, I sat on the porch as the sun slipped into the horizon, the sky painted orange and pink. I held my cheap replacement guitar in my lap, strumming the chords I've finally managed to learn. My fingers ache, my rhythm stumbles, but I keep going. Across the street, the neighbor's kids stopped their game to listen for a moment. One little girl called out, "Play another one, Miss Dorothy." And so I did. I sang one of his songs, shaky but strong, and for the first time, I wasn't thinking about loss. I was thinking about legacy, about how love, when it's real, outlives everything: grief, distance, even death. When I finished, the applause was small but genuine, and I laughed, really laughed, for the first time in years. Later, as the house settled into its nighttime quiet, I pressed play on the cassette once more. His voice filled the air, warm and sure. "Dot, this one's for you." I closed my eyes, letting the melody wash over me. And in that moment, I knew he had kept his promise. The music would always belong to us. Now, it belongs to me, and I'll carry it until the day I join him again,